So what we're going to talk about is microbial nutrition and how it affects growth. So we're really going to stick with a bunch of things that affect how well microorganisms grow. Just like our cells, bacteria have got to have a constant influx of substances from their habitat. They've got to eat stuff that is around them, and because they're single-celled and not all of them move, bless you, okay, their refrigerator, right, their fast food is all coming from the environment. So in order to survive, they have to place themselves in environments that provide them with all of the nutrients they need to maintain the cell itself and do their big ultimate goal of reproducing and making more bacteria. You've got to have lots of nutrients to get this done. This will include elements like carbon and hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, magnesium, manganese. Do you need to know this list? No. Up there. Okay. The big stuff up there. All right. There will be, for every organism, including us, sets of what we call essential nutrients. Things that have got to be in their environment because they have got to be a part of their food source. The essentials, things you need, they're necessities. On this topic, some organisms will be what we call fastidious. I always say that they're the picky eaters of the group because they require special nutrients. Anybody have kids? You have a picky eater? Do your kids survive on macaroni and cheese like mine do? Like, we're single-handedly supporting craft. Okay? Can't go anywhere unless they have macaroni and cheese or chicken nuggets. Your kids are fastidious. They're surviving on this necessity. Okay? Must have macaroni and cheese. And certain microbes will be the same way. There will be organisms that say, listen, we can't live there unless there's a lot of zinc. Not going to live in these places unless they provide us with extra magnesium or extra sulfur. It just depends upon the organism. There will be nutrients we refer to as macronutrients. A macronutrient is needed in large quantities. Just like the difference between macro science and microscience. Okay? When you're doing anatomy and physiology, you're doing a version of like macrobiology. You're studying big organisms and big structures, stuff you can see. So macronutrients are needed in large quantities. The micronutrients needed, but in smaller quantities. I'm actually going to back this up. Lots of times these are also called trace elements. Organisms have got to have them, but they need them in really small amounts. The most common use for a trace element is it's used as a coenzyme or cofactor for enzymes. Do you remember enzymes and cofactors? Like some enzymes have to have a helper that goes along with them that's not actually part of the enzyme. This works for proteins too. Hemoglobin has to have what along with it in order for it to work? Oxygen and say it again. Iron. Okay. Iron is a trace element for us. We need iron, right? But isn't there such a thing as having too much iron? Okay. So there's kind of a delicate balance. We need a little bit of it because too much starts being bad. We will also define nutrients based on whether they are organic nutrients or inorganic nutrients. The easiest way to remember this, an organic nutrient contains carbons and hydrogens. Carbons that get bonded to hydrogens, organic nutrients. They can be small, they can be the large macromolecules, which we're going to talk about in a little while. Inorganic molecules will be everything else. Anything that doesn't fall into the category of being organic. So, for example, here's one that you guys have seen before. I know it. C6H12O6 is what? It's glucose. It's a sugar. Okay. Organic or inorganic? Organic. How did you know? Is it carbons and hydrogens? What about this one? Carbon dioxide. And it is inorganic. There's carbons, but there are no what? Hydrogens. Okay. We have to kind of stop that thought process of organic, it grows in the ground kind of thing. Okay? Because that's not chemistry, organic, inorganic. Okay? Yes, I know people produce carbon dioxide. It comes from an organism. That doesn't make it an organic molecule as far as chemistry is concerned. So there will be organic molecules that are important to growth, as well as inorganic molecules that are important to growth. Here. So let's take a look inside of a cell. If we look inside of a cell, the majority of what we're going to find is actually water. You guys have heard this before. You're 70% water, 80% water. Depends on the cell. But if you look in the cytoplasm of a cell, most of it's water. The thing about water is that it provides a base for reactions to occur on. It sort of provides, in all the cytoplasm, provides this area for reactions to happen in. We'll see proteins, things like enzymes, parts of the cell actually dissolved in the water. And if we start taking a look at the dry weight of cells, 97% of the dry weight is going to be organic molecules. Now the dry weight means we took away the what? The water. So when we look at everything that's not water, most of what we see is organic compounds. 96% of the dry weight will actually be 6 individual elements. I'm going to take this away. And those are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. CHONPS. Chomps. Because this is what builds the bulk of the cell, we know that when cells are feeding, when cells are obtaining nutrients from the environment around them, they're going to need to provide themselves with more carbons, hydrogens, oxygens, nitrogens, phosphorus, and sulfur. Because these are what we build macromolecules out of. So when we talk about things like sugars, sugars are made of carbons, hydrogens, oxygens. You guys just saw one up there. Agreed? Say yes for the video.
Yes.
There you go. All right. We throw nitrogen and phosphorus into the mix when we build nucleotides. When we build things like DNA or RNA. DNA and RNA, carbons, hydrogens, oxygens, nitrogens, phosphorus. Proteins, carbons, hydrogens, oxygens, nitrogens. Some of them have phosphorus. Some of them have sulfur. Depends upon the protein. These are the main components of what organisms are built of. Even when you do lipids, carbons, hydrogens, oxygens. Phospholipids, you throw phosphorus in there. So, what we see is that in order to keep this 96% of the dry weight in the cell, organisms have to chomp on the chomps. Help you remember it, right? This is the foods that we've got to provide. This is the things that have to be in our food sources and in the food sources of bacteria. They've got to chomp on the chomps. Because we're going to need carbons and hydrogens, oxygens, nitrogens, etc. in order to make things like new pieces of DNA, new proteins, new lipids, new sugars, new enzymes. They're made out of these individual elements. Now, the nice thing about cells, and kind of one of the coolest things about cells, is that cells are the world's best recyclers. So, we take in things like sugars or proteins, and our cells and our bodies, just like bacterial cells, have the ability to recycle all of that into brand new pieces. They can build things with the components they take in, and we do what with our food? You digest it, right? Digest is another word for what? What is it? There you go. Thank you, Evan. Okay. When we digest things, we break them down. So we take these big macromolecules and break them down into these small pieces, and then take the small pieces and recycle them back into new things. Maybe you need new sugars. Sugars usually don't get recycled back into sugars. It'd be nice. Okay. But instead, they usually get recycled into things like lipids. Okay. But you want to build muscle? What's muscle built out of? Protein. So your diet consists of a lot of what? Protein. You ever hear people doing this? Yeah. The bodybuilders are like, oh, I got a protein powder. Okay. Everybody's on a protein powder. Because they know the more protein you take in, the more you have to build more protein with. Okay. So we're really good recyclers. You can take in a few different types of nutrients, break them apart, and restack them together, and make brand new components for cells out of them. We're excellent recyclers, so we're going to keep that in mind the whole time we're talking about things like macromolecules. So the macromolecules, you've heard this one before. I know you have, because you've done it somewhere. Anatomy and Physiology, Bio 100, 112, 101. You have talked about macromolecules, right? Yeah. Oh, that was kind of pitiful, y'all. Everybody remembers macromolecules? Okay, that was better. Okay. The nice thing about macromolecules is that they work on this monomer polymer system. Okay. We see 4 major types of macromolecules that are used to build cells and therefore to build organisms. So up first, carbohydrates, carbs. What do you put a bunch of together to build a carb? I hear it. Sugars, right? So monomers for carbohydrates, you might say simple sugars. I saw some people mouthing monosaccharides. Mainly because another word for this is often polysaccharides. Lipids are a fancy term for what? Fats. Now, not all lipids have a monomer. When you talk about things like steroids and sterols, okay, and the hormones that are lipid soluble, those usually do not have a monomer. But if you're talking about things like phospholipids and membranes, the monomer for lipids, anybody remember it? No. Fatty acids. Oh. Our fed protein, there we go, made of amino acids. And last, but certainly not least, the nucleic acids are made of nucleotides. Excellent. Who said that? There we go. I've heard it, and it was in this direction. Very good. Nucleotides. That's usually the one that messes everybody up. Because for some reason, if I just ask it off the cuff without having a big chart up here, and I say, all right, what are nucleic acids made of? People tend to yell proteins. That's wrong. Can't be proteins because proteins are their own separate type of macromolecule. Now, what we're saying here by putting these in these monomer polymer designations is that if I stack a bunch of amino acids together, if I string a whole bunch of them next to one another, that is how I get certain types of proteins. If I put a bunch of nucleic acids together, that's how I get certain types of nucleic acids. So I always tell people, these are the Legos of making cells. Because as long as you have Legos, you could build anything you want. So if you're taking a whole bunch of Legos that are nucleotides, you can put them together in a million different ways and get different types of nucleic acids. Which is kind of amazing. Do you know how many different types of DNA nucleotides there are? Yeah, you do. A, T, C, and G. How many different types of DNA nucleotides are there? You just did it. 4. And everything that's alive in the world is made of nucleic acids. The instructions for how to make every living thing in the entire world, and even some non-living stuff, is stuck in nucleic acids. So that means frogs just have their A's, T's, C's, and G's put together differently than birds, which have their A's, T's, C's, and G's put together differently than people, and we're put together different for dogs, and put together different for whales, and put together different for bacteria, but they're all the same stuff. crazy.
Same Legos, just
Same Legos, you just took them apart and put them together differently. But think of, if you have 4 different kinds of Legos and a whole bunch of them, you can build almost anything. Lego plane, Lego boat, Lego house. So this we find in every single type of cell, no matter what the living organism. It's about how these are put together. And luckily for us, when it comes to nutrition, we're really good recyclers because we can somehow figure out how to take the amino acids and all the proteins from a steak and turn it into amino acids and proteins in a heart, and amino acids and proteins in a bicep, right? So we're really good recycling our nutrients.